Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everybody. At today's Derby City Council Licensing Committee meeting. If we just go through the order, is there any apologies apart from Dean Peatfield?
No, I've not received any others.
Okay. Late items to introduce by the chair. There's none by me. Any declarations of interest? I take that as a no. Minutes of the meeting held on 30th January 2020. Is everybody okay with them?
Move as printed, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smells. Item number 5. Next on the agenda, licensing of 8-seater private hire vehicles. I think that's over to you, Michael.
Yeah, that one is me, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody.
Before we just start, Michael, can I just say, if anybody wants to speak, there's a bar chart on the left. If you want to just put your names on there or put a message on there, and if I do struggle to pick it up, just give us a wave, and obviously keep your mics muted when you're not speaking, please. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So yes, this report asks members to consider whether the current vehicle specification for private hire vehicles, which is attached to the report at Appendix 1, requires amendment to allow consideration of vehicles which carry 8 passengers. So there are more vehicles of this size becoming available. However, some of them may not meet our current specifications. The specifications were put in place to ensure passenger safety and driver safety by ensuring a comfortable amount of legroom for the passenger without being too close to the driver. And that's the point at which most of these vehicles have failed on in the past, as the additional seats are usually smaller and the legroom is more reduced. The proposal set out in the report would require vehicles which are manufactured to carry 8 persons plus a driver which do not meet the current vehicle specification to be referred to the licensing subcommittee for consideration. The process already works successfully for new Hackney carriage vehicles and allows the vehicles in question to be seen by committee before making their decision. To get a vehicle approved, the prospective proprietor will not have to actually purchase the vehicle. They can arrange with a manufacturer to have a vehicle present at the committee meeting, allowing officers delegated powers to ensure that the request only appears before the committee on one occasion. Although the current COVID climate would not advocate large numbers of people travelling close together in any kind of vehicle at the current moment in time, the option of an 8-seated vehicle in the future may appeal to customers who travel in larger groups. Licensing a wider range of vehicles with varying seat capacities means customers will have a greater choice of vehicles to suit their needs and also allow proprietors the option of providing a service which caters for larger numbers. The recommendations, Chair, listed in the report to agree that applications for vehicles which are required to be licensed for 8 passengers which do not meet the current vehicle specification for such vehicles are referred to the licensing subcommittee for consideration. To agree that the Head of Environmental Protection, Housing Standards Licensing, Emergency Planning and Business Continuity and the licensing team leader be delegated the power to amend the Council's adopted specification for private hire vehicles to incorporate the requirements for such changes, and that all other Council policies relating to private hire vehicles shall apply to such vehicles. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, can I put my name down for a question?
Chair, I think you're muted.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. Sorry, who was that? Yeah, come in.
Yeah, Chair, I wonder if, so I'm still trying to work out how to get on the conversation side of it. On the, yeah, can I put my name down for a question, please?
Yeah, of course you can. Go ahead.
Yeah, just picking up obviously on the recommendations. On I was on the understanding that obviously if a vehicle's been actually manufactured and designed for 8 seats plus the driver, then surely all the safety regulations have been done through VOSA and the safety aspects and everything else. We've got a business down in Cornwall where we revamp camper vans and things like that, and obviously the amount of paperwork that you've got to go through in order to get something through, it is quite mind-boggling, really. I mean, we're not looking at putting, say, a van with some deck chairs in the back, tied down in the back type of thing. So I thought if it's a specific vehicle that's actually got, is actually designed for 8 seats plus a driver, then I would have thought that all the necessary regulations and everything have been met on that. So if somebody can give me an update on that or anything, I would much appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. If I just come and quickly answer that question, yeah, as a national fleet operator, all vehicle with 9 seats, including the driver, do meet the safety requirements, Euro tested, crash tested, and everything that I was saying. So when VOSA actually admit them to be turned into, whether it's a Ford or VW, Mercedes, whatever, all that's all been done by VOSA and then hence put out onto the market for people to buy and drive. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks. Like I said, obviously, if there was an adaptation after the event, where somebody was trying to, shove extra seats in that obviously doesn't meet the standards and everything else, and obviously that would be a bit of a safety issue, really. But yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you for that. Councillor Holmes, you're next, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's just really for the benefit of some of the new members. I wonder if Mike could just say what we've currently got and why we would be looking to change, what the changes are exactly from what we've currently got at the minute. That was all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holmes. Michael, over to you.
Yeah, so, well, as I've said, the current private hire vehicle licence specification is set out in Appendix 1 to the report. So if you go and have a look at that all the way down towards the bottom, once you get past all the text, past the pictures with the sort of dimension lines on there into a table, I believe it's table sort of line K in the report, you'll see that we set a minimum measurement for legroom for all private hire vehicles, and as I said in my presentation, the issue with these minibus style vehicles is that often the vehicle, the seat that is, there's often 2 passenger seats next to the driver in the front, and as Councillor Marshall has talked about, these come off the production line of wherever they're made, whatever manufacturer that they are, and that smaller seat, so the seat that's between the front passenger and the driver, is often smaller than the rest of the other seats. And because the gear change, if it's a manual vehicle, the gear change is often directly in front of, that seat. Although I think some of the newer minibuses now that are automatic or that are manual will have the gear selector now going into the dashboard rather than going down into the footwell of the vehicle, which will give a little bit more sort of legroom space. But essentially, that seat has not met the criteria set out in that vehicle specification. So what we have tended to do in the past is to limit the number of passengers that those vehicles can take to 7. So this would be, an addition of 1 extra licensed person to be carried, should the vehicle proprietor want to make use of that. So it will be licensed to carry 8 passengers rather than 7 passengers. Does that help?
Can I just ask another question on that? So does this involve a passenger sitting in the front with the driver to make it 8 altogether? Is that correct?
Yes. Ultimately, yeah. There'll be two sets of 3 bench seats in the back, which meet the specifications already. So they'll have 3 across the very back, then 3 almost opposite a sliding door that comes in, and then in the very, very front, where the driver is, where the passenger who is sitting next to the near side door, in the middle, there will be that 8th seat. It's that 8th seat that we're talking about.
So then presumably during COVID, they wouldn't be allowed to use that. If we approved tonight, said, yeah, that's fine, would that front seat be allowed to be used at the current time, or would we stipulate that?
Well, I don't think we'd want to go down of stipulating it. I mean, what we have done during COVID for all of our, the licensed trade is to be issuing them with some guidance, the guidance that's coming from central government about proper social distancing and mitigation measures that they put in place, and as I said in the presentation, we are, by considering this evening, we are not advocating the use of 8-seater vehicles. We're not advocating people go out in a large group of 8 seats in a vehicle tomorrow night. I mean, it won't happen tomorrow night. It won't happen that quickly necessarily. But this is just providing that option in the future for those vehicle proprietors that want to purchase this type of vehicle, to give them, potentially, and it's got to be subject to it being approved through the committee process, as we do with the Hackney carriages, but it will give them that extra option to be able to accommodate up to groups of 8 people.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just come in there, Michael, for all the members? Up until 2010, most minibuses were all gear mounted. All the gear sticks were floor mounted. After 2010/2011, the gear mount was changed. That's why there was a smaller seat there. Now the front seat is the same size as what you get on the left-hand side of the passenger seat. It's a complete same size because the gear mount has now been lifted off the floor in parallel with the steering wheel on the dash. So it has actually created that extra room, hence for it to be enough leg space, the same as on the left-hand side where the passenger will sit against the window. And at the moment, I think the way that most operators are working regarding minibus or even 5-seaters, they're not allowing 4 passengers, mostly in the back, and nobody is allowed in the front due to COVID anyway. So I hope that answers Councillor Holmes' question. Next question, Councillor Skelton and then Councillor Smale.
Thank you, Chair. Normally, obviously, the process for looking at the new types of vehicles, as Michael Kay has alluded to before, was they actually a manufacturer or dealer would bring it to the committee meeting, and we'd all pile into the car park and have a look at it. Obviously, we can't do that now because we're having meetings over Skype. So I think we also need to realise that these 8-seater minibuses are already being used in Derby. I actually saw one a couple of days ago. It was licensed by South Derbyshire, and I think there's been ones also licensed in Wolverhampton as well, and then they're able to come into Derby and are used as private hire vehicles. So it's not like they're not already being used here. Having looked carefully at the actual recommendations, I feel 2.1 could do with a bit of alteration. So I'm proposing to amend it as follows. If you don't mind if I read it out, if that's all right.
Yeah, go on.
So it actually would be best, I think, to be split into a new 2.1 and then a new 2.2, and the others obviously move another number down. So for the new 2.1, to agree that applications for the following vehicles, which are required to be licensed for 8 passengers, are approved, provided they have not been modified since manufacture: Vauxhall Vivaro, Mercedes Vito, VW Transporter, Ford Transit, Renault Trafic and Toyota Hiace. And then a new 2.2, to agree that applications for other vehicles which are required to be licensed for 8 passengers, which do not meet the current vehicle specification for such vehicles, or that have been modified since manufacture, are referred to the licensing subcommittee for consideration.
Thank you, Councillor Skelton. Can I just come in on that as well before? Michael, the way we want to do this is, if it goes through, is any vehicle that's been modified is not allowed to go into the fleet, because you've got well structures, you've got the way the seat is positioned, and if somebody just bought a van, like we've had many years ago in the past, from 2010 to 13, if I remember correctly, where people were just going out and buying vans and converting them, that's not acceptable. They've got to be coming off the production line as on the logbooks as 9-seaters, and not something somebody's modified at a garage in somebody's backyard.
Chair, Chair, if you don't mind, could I just step in on that? I think if we mandated that, we'd be going beyond the legislation. The legislation does actually permit vehicle modifications. I think the key to it will have to be that their modifications would have to be to a prescribed or accepted standard.
Yeah, that's right, standard, yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I was doing. Obviously, we're with a certificate standard, not just somebody who just decided to put it together one weekend and bought it. Obviously, the council license.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it did almost sound like you were suggesting that, Councillor.
No.
I was just going to say that my new 2.2, obviously I'll just repeat that bit, to agree that applications for other vehicles which are required to be licensed for 8 passengers, which do not meet the current vehicle specification for such vehicles, or that have been modified since manufacture, are referred to the licensing subcommittee for consideration. So we would be able to, anything that we're unhappy with, obviously we could reject it. But if we're happy that it has been done properly, everything that needs strengthening within the chassis or whatever has been done, etc., we could then pass it. But obviously that's a way that we can actually remove those that we don't feel are suitable.
Thank you, Councillor Skelton. Councillor Hasselgrave, you're next to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, the safety
of... I'm sorry to do this, Councillor Hasselgrave. Sorry, Chair. In essence, Councillor Skelton has proposed an amendment to the resolution. You need to go through the process at this stage of agreeing whether that's going to be accepted in lieu of the current recommendations or not, which is going to require a seconder and a vote.
Right.
I'm happy to second it, Chair.
Seconded by Councillor Hasselgrave.
Yep.
Well, I'll leave it.
Okay, thank you for that. And are we all in favour?
Yes.
Yes, Chair.
Yep.
Anybody against? Thank you. Anybody against? Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Councillor Skelton.
I'll record that as all in favour then, but if anyone wants to shout up just in case that they were against. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Olu. Sorry, Councillor Hasselgrave, back to you again.
Sorry, I was just going to say, although I think I've been preempted by what we've just decided, really, that, you know, the safety of all in the city who use taxis, that's drivers and the public, are paramount to us. We've heard that their votes are approved. So, you know, I mean, we don't have vehicles on the road in this country which the government feels are inappropriate or potentially dangerous. Councillor Atwell, the chair, has reassured us about the gear stick issue, so that there is no issue about the gear stick being in a compromised position by this smaller seat, and apparently the seat is now the same size as the other seat. And we've heard also that 8-seaters are being used around the city, but they're licensed to other authorities, and you know, that's something we don't like. We want our taxi drivers to be licensed with us, and we can't be getting this trend that people look at us and say they're behind the times. They're not, you know, they're not going with what's the current thinking. And you know, taxi drivers are taking a risk, aren't they, when they buy a new vehicle? You know, they're enterprising, they're self-employed, they must see a return for what they actually put out in terms of expenditure for a vehicle. And I think we should be doing everything within the proviso that you know, it doesn't compromise safety. And it seems to me that Councillor Skelton's amendment helps us greatly in that, and will save a lot of taxis being, you know, going through this process of being ratified, and then it stops that type of taxi being done again, because we've said that kind of taxi, unless it's been modified after manufacture and we don't know about that modification, we need to sort that out. But I think it's really helpful, personally.
Thank you, Councillor Essegrave. And just picking up on the point you made, I think you're absolutely spot on with your comments. The problem we've got at the moment is all the people that are bringing the 9-seaters are not getting licensed in Derby City. They're Derby City residents, but they're going to Wolverhampton, South Derbyshire, Gedling and wherever else they can, and then bringing them back into Derby. I mean, we want people to be investing into Derby City Council or badge holders, and putting plates on that says Derby City Council on the back, and I think this way is a positive way forward, and obviously we'll see an increase in people wanting to come to Derby, and obviously better our city and better our taxi fleet in Derby. So thank you for your kind comments. Is there anybody else who wants to speak?
Yes, please, Chair, if that's all right. Just a quick question.
Yes, Councillor Smells.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick one to Mike. Obviously, this is the, you know, I've got to be honest. It's probably because obviously it's an out-of-town taxi when I phone for one, and I thought I've always been graced with an 8-seater when I do ask for one. And a bit of good info there, by the way, Chair, about the gearbox not being in the middle anymore. Thank God, because I don't think this midriff will fit in the middle anyway.
At least you're honest.
So at least on the newer models now, I'll be good to go. Mike, are we going to have to do this kind of paper again, or is this the kind of like the last final section we've got on this now in regards to having 8-seater taxis now? Is this kind of like the last of it that we're going to have to approve, or are we going to have to keep? Is this something that's going to keep reoccurring? Are we going to have to keep revisiting this depending on models?
Well, that largely depends really on what the models look like in terms of how they roll off the production line. If we're taking the recommendations that Councillor Skelton has proposed, essentially what that means is, I think, is that we will. You are minded to approve or allowed to be approved as 8-seaters, that list of vehicle manufacturers that was cited. But then for all others that subsequently come along, I think recommendation 2.2, the new recommendation 2.2 from Councillor Skelton, I think infers that we would still want to look at those, not just those ones that have been modified, if I'm correct. So what I think it would mean is
that's what I did mean.
Yeah. So
I don't think there are any other manufacturers currently, or certainly not volume ones of other minibuses.
No, but I suppose just
any that crops up, we can cover it by going to committee. Yeah.
Yeah, just answering sort of Councillor Smell's specific query, then if a different manufacturer, so I don't know, Peugeot or Citroën, or BMW, or there are a number of other large manufacturers that might produce a vehicle of that size, that would mean technically that we would have to call them in and have a look at them. But again, as I said in the conversation though, if as vehicle technology gets better and gear changes now start to disappear completely, and that seat gets bigger and the leg room gets, if it meets the specification that we've got, then it's not an issue about looking at them at all. If it meets the criteria, it meets the criteria. This was only as a bit of a stopgap to be looking at vehicles just because of one seat didn't meet the criteria. So there's I can't be 100% sure how that might pad out in the future, but it will mean that we might have to look at vehicles at some point. Again, Councillor Smell.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any more speakers on this matter? Right, okay, then we'll move on to item 6, statutory taxes and private hire vehicle standards. Is that yourself again, Michael?
No, Chair, that's Angela.
Angela.
Sorry,
Okay.
Chair, and before we get to that, Chair, we actually still do need to move the full resolutions now and approve them. All we've done so far is accepted Councillor Skelton's amendment, and then we've had the debate.
Okay.
We've not formally moved the resolutions.
Okay. Can we move the resolution?
Would you like me to move it, Chair?
Yeah,
Yes, that's fine, yeah.
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank
So
you.
the new 2.1 and the new 2.2, I move, and the it's the old 2.2 to become 2.3, and the old 2.3 to become 2.4. If everyone has got their paper different of them.
I think we could do it in writing if that's at all
I
possible.
can read it out then, okay?
Do you want to read this out, Councillor Skelton?
I'll read everything out once again.
Could you just go slowly though, please, because I am trying to scribble this down as you're talking.
I can
Okay.
send it to you as well, Jackie, if that's
Oh, that would be brilliant. Thank you, Councillor Skelton.
right. So 2.1. To agree that applications for the following vehicles, which are required to be licensed for 8 passengers, are approved, provided they have not been modified since manufacture. Vauxhall Vivaro, Mercedes Vito, VW Transporter, Ford Transit, Renault Traffic and Toyota Hiace. Then the new 2.2. To agree that applications for other vehicles which are required to be licensed for 8 passengers, which do not meet the current vehicle specification for such vehicles, or that have been modified since manufacture, are referred to the licensing subcommittee for consideration. And then the new 2.3, to agree that the head of environmental protection, housing standards, licensing, emergency planning and business continuity, and the licensing team leader be delegated the power to amend the Council's adopted specification for private hire vehicles to incorporate the requirements for such changes. The new 2.4, that all other Council policies relating to private hire vehicles shall apply to such vehicles.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Skelton. Are we all happy with that?
Yes.
Anybody?
That's
Yeah,
right.
I'm happy. Are we all for, or anybody against? Okay, that's gone through. Thank you very much for that. Right, moving on to item number 6, statutory taxi and private hire vehicle standards. Over to you, Angela.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, fine, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, then this report is for information purposes only, and as the document that I'm referring to in itself is rather large, I'm not going to go through it page by page. What I'm going to try and do is highlight some of the main points for you. If there are any matters which the committee want to have clarification on, I can always address that either in a further committee or outside of the committee. To start with then, just as an outline, the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, announced the new licensing standards on the 21st of July 2020. I'll share some of his actual announcement later on, but the release actually stated, the government introduces robust new standards for the taxi and private hire vehicle sector across England and Wales to protect passengers. New recommendations include DBS criminal records checks for drivers every 6 months, and it also stated that the latest steps taken by the government to reduce the risk of harm to passengers and help improve consistency across local authorities. What I'll do now is just highlight a couple of the points that I did list in the report that will just clarify a little bit of the area for you. I say it's a very new document, so I've not taken it all in myself yet. One of the main areas of focus of these standards is obviously protecting children and vulnerable persons, particularly post the Jay and Casey report a few years ago, which both highlighted examples of drivers being directly linked with examples of CSE. The new document sets out a framework that licensing authorities must have regard to, and it's very clear about that, when exercising their licensing functions, which, as we know, is a non-executive function. One of the first things it reflects on is the licensing policy itself, which it is suggesting should be renewed at least every 5 years to take into account national and local changes. Any proposed changes which would have a significant effect should be consulted upon widely, and not only with the trade itself, but also on a local level. This is not unlike similar requirements in other regimes, such as the licensing and gambling regimes. In relation to decision making, the document's clear that all decision makers must be given sufficient training to undertake their responsibilities. That includes members and officers, and such training should include, but is not limited to, licensing procedures, the rules of natural justice, CSE, disability and difficult decision making, and the importance of avoiding the appearance of bias or predetermination. A robust system should be in place for customer complaints to ensure they are dealt with expediently and fairly, and so that trends can be monitored and acted upon quickly. For example, that could be if a driver...
Sorry, Angela, sorry to interrupt, you're breaking up there. Hello. So we didn't catch the last bit because you just disappeared. The voice did.
Okay, sorry about that. I'll do the last.
Chair, could I just make a suggestion? I think it might be something to do with the internet connection. Angela, if you take your video off, it might improve your latency in streaming.
Will do, Councillor, thank you. Okay, so if we go back to the last paragraph, it was in relation to a system being in place for customer complaints and ensuring that those complaints are dealt with thoroughly and expediently. For example, we may want to reconsider if a driver has a history of multiple complaints. We may not consider that he's fit and proper to hold a licence further. On that subject, in determining whether a driver is fit and proper, a 6-monthly DBS check should be carried out so that any impropriety can be picked up as soon as possible. It also states that such tests as safeguarding awareness, including the county lines exploitation, and a language proficiency test covering both oral and written be included. In relation to the vehicle process, the document stating that licensing authorities should require a basic DBS for vehicle proprietors, as well as for private hire operators. And the licensing authority should also maintain a register of booking and dispatch staff. The final point I want to cover today, in brief, is enforcement. The standards, the new standards, support initiatives like having a joint enforcement agreement between local authorities so that officers can enforce outside their own boundary. This has worked well in several areas already. The licensing authority's expectations should be clear to drivers, proprietors and operators through policies and conditions. And the use of a points-based system for minor breaches is also mentioned. In relation to deciding to suspend or revoke a licence, full consideration must be given to the evidence available at that time. And obviously the decision needs to be recorded, whether that is an officer or a committee decision. Well, that was just a whistle-stop tour of the new standards from the Transport Secretary. And what I can say is in Derby, we are lucky that most of the standards are either in place or in development, and some of that development will be shown in the forward plan report that I'm presenting a little bit later on. Chair, thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Angela. Anybody got any questions?
I've got a couple that wanted to speak. Richard Hudson first.
Sorry, I beg your pardon.
Okay.
Councillor Hudson, sorry, over to you.
Hello, good evening, Chair. Angela may have just answered a part of what I was going to actually ask. As I was going through this document, there's obviously a lot in here that is going to need auditing against the local status quo. Obviously, it can't all be integrated at once. what kind of reporting format are we to expect back to this committee once this has been audited against the status quo here going forwards?
Councillor, what I am intending to do, and it will become clear when I've explained the work plan in my next report, what I'm hoping to do is, as you've quite rightly said, there is a lot of comparative work to be taken on, there's some new development work to be taken on. So my proposal is that I report back to this committee on a regular basis, perhaps once a quarter, to highlight any movements we've made or any things that are stalling the process, and hopefully that will keep you up to date as well. The Transport Secretary said that the local authorities need to put this in place as soon as possible, so there isn't a definitive time, but what I do want to make sure is that we get it done properly.
Right, thank you for that, Angela. As not to reinvent the wheel, when I was actually thinking about that, you could use something that already exists, like the forward plan that is used at Cabinet to forward forecast what's actually going to happen. It's a familiar format to elected members anyway, and we would actually understand it if it was presented like that.
Yes, I can look at that as a comparative.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Angela.
Could I just come in there, Chair, as well? Sorry,
yeah.
Just to add into what Angela has said. I mean, there is a lot to it, and it's fairly hot off the press. But you know, we have already started to begin to talk to some of the other council departments that have got particular interests in this. You know, so our colleagues in the home school transport department as well. You know, where they obviously use you know, licensed drivers from both within and outside of the city to undertake some of that work. So it's going to involve a liaison with a couple of partners as well to produce a plan for this.
Thanks for that, Michael. Councillor Cooper, you're next, sir.
Thank you, Councillor Harwell. Thank you, Angela, and thank you, Councillor Hudson, for raising that issue about timescales and how much work there's to be to do, because, you know, reading this document, there seems to be quite a lot of really important things that's going to be changing in the taxi licensing committee and the trade moving forward. So in the similar vein to kind of what Angela said about, you know, reporting to us, I'm of a mind that I think we need to help as well as elected members. So I've got a recommendation, if you're willing to hear it, Chair, and I'll put it into the text box so that you can read it as well, where there's a working group to be could be set up, cross-party, across the licensing committee, and then they can also report in on, you know, what actions are to be carried out, and also what is going to be done and what are the timeframes of delivery, so that there's political and elected members an oversight on what's going off alongside with Angela and the team. Is that something that you'll be willing to for me to bring to the committee?
If I can just come back on that, I think obviously with the licensing committee already in action, and obviously Angela's turned around and said that she will be reporting to us every quarter, and if she needs to at any earlier date, I think we should be going along with that, because obviously any information we need, we've all got access to each other and access to the licensing officers. So I think without creating any more work for anybody, I mean, that's just my personal view. I mean, I'm quite happy to take on board what Angela's turned around and said, but I mean, I'm open to anybody else's views on it.
If I can interject here, since you've asked for specific views on that, I think we need to bear that in mind when we're looking at the forward plan, which is going to be presented later in the agenda. And if we feel we've got that as a kind of thing that could be going on at the same time, then we ought to look at it. But I don't think, although I might be wrong, but I was reassured by what Mike had said about, and Angela, about the amount we've actually got in the system already. And I don't think we're going to have a lot of stuff coming out. If it's legislation and where to make sure we comply with it, where's the problem? It's all about safety of drivers, passengers and people out on the streets of Derby.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Segrave. Councillor Skelton, you're next to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I think just looking at one of the items, and Angela mentioned it as well, about the frequency of DBS checks. I think I'm right in thinking that when the 3-year licenses came in, we as an authority decided that we would get our licensed drivers to agree to have a, I suppose it's sort of in real time information coming back from the DVS to us, so that then it doesn't need to be waiting for every 6 months or whatever time. If somebody commits an offence, once that's been processed within the legal system, it will come back to us. So we know pretty swiftly. So we're actually, I think, doing better than the law is actually saying at the moment.
Thank you for that, Count. Yeah, that's fine. Thanks for that, Councillor. Thank you for that. Councillor Smell, you're next to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it's a welcomed document from the Department for Transport, but obviously it's quite hefty. There's a lot of pages to go through, but there is some significant changes that I think we can all welcome, not just to protect users of taxis, but also taxi drivers themselves. In particularly the idea of obviously CCTV. I think that will be a major help to protecting the public and taxi drivers. I mean, let's not forget we've seen attacks on taxi drivers that have gone not undocumented but been reported, but with no backup of CCTV. I mean, we had one not that so long ago from outside NADS, if we remember, where it resulted in a very serious injury towards a taxi driver, which was truly tragic. But I do welcome the report, and there's a lot that we do as a licensing committee that we're going to have to sit down, get our heads round, and commit a lot of time to helping officers, but also helping in the licensing trade themselves, because there's going to be some changes that will mean some significant changes in the future. But overall, I think this is something that we should all be getting behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smell. Just a quick one, Michael, regarding the new report regarding CCTV. Will the government be giving any subsidies to drivers to fund CCTV cameras in their vehicles? Just a question.
Yeah, I'm not sure, to be perfectly honest, Chair. I wouldn't like to sort of commit, either yes or no on that. None that I'm aware of at this current time.
Okay. Thank you very much. Anybody else?
Ajit, can I ask a question?
Yes, you can.
The question is to Angela. I think me recalling back a couple of years back, I think something similar came into the reports of oral and written tests for taxi drivers. So what sort of a standard does the report recommend these tests? Is this going to be put to consultation? And so I just want to know the question to that.
Yes, Councillor. There aren't any definitive preferred levels for qualifications in relation to oral and written English tests at this moment, but I am aware that there are standards that the immigration unit use. So whether they're going to look at instigating something like that, because what we have to remember, this isn't legislation, but that would be the level I would imagine we will be working towards.
Okay.
And Chair, just to add, I also understand there will be some statutory guidance coming out as well, which hopefully should put some flesh on those particular bones in due course.
Okay, thank you for that. Anybody else wish to speak?
Chair, just on that issue that Councillor Khan mentioned, is there any information as to whether this will be for all drivers who currently, ply their trade all over England and Wales, or is it to be just to newly licensed drivers from a certain date that just will be defined in the Act?
Chair, again, if I can pick that one up.
Yeah, if you can.
I don't believe the legislation has drilled down into that degree of depth just yet, but I expect, again, that that's one of the issues which the guidance which will follow will pick up and address.
Councillor Scott, I think like Michael Kay said, it's still hot off the press at the moment, so I think there will be things that will follow. Obviously, we'll know a little better when we get some more documentation. Right, okay, thank you for that. Moving on to item 7, taxi license.
Chair,
Sorry, go on.
Hold up a second.
We need to go back to the vote and the recommendations formally.
Sorry. Yeah.
Before you actually vote on the recommendations in the report, we have what in essence is an amendment from Councillor Cooper, which we need to go through the process of accommodating or eliminating, as the case may be.
Okay.
It will require a second and then obviously to be put to the vote.
Okay. For the Councillor Cooper's amendment, have you got a seconder?
I'll second it, Chair.
Thank you. All those for?
Chair, I apologise. This is Stephen Mason, Democratic Services. I think at this point, this is obviously the first meeting of this particular committee, and I'm just minded about other committees like the Planning Control Committee, and I think it would be worthwhile at this point for that recommendation to be read out to the committee, and then the individual votes to be taken.
Okay. Councillor Cooper, can I just come back to you and ask you to read out the memories? Thank you, Steve.
Absolutely no problem, Councillor Atwell, and thank you, Mr Mason. That a working group to be set up, cross-party, of licensing committee members, one member per group, which would focus on the delivery of the statutory taxi and private hire vehicle standards, with a clear timeframe of delivery for each relevant part of the standard as printed, reporting to each licensing committee moving forward, reporting on progress and actions taken by the council until implementation of the standards. Thank you.
Thank you. All those who are for the amendment?
I think we're going to go to individual votes, Councillor Atwell.
Okay, individual vote then. If I can, Jackie, do you want to read the names that take the vote?
I'll go alphabetically, okay? If you could just give your vote then. So Councillor Bettany?
Against.
Against. Councillor Cooper?
For.
For. Councillor Graves?
Against.
Against. Councillor Heselgrave?
Against.
Councillor Holmes?
For.
Councillor Hudson?
For.
Councillor Khan?
Against.
Councillor Marshall?
Against.
Councillor Pearce?
For.
Councillor Pegg?
For.
Councillor Sandu?
Against.
Councillor Skelton?
Against.
Councillor Smale?
For.
And Councillor Atwell?
Against.
Okay, just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 against. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 for.
Okay, that was 8 against and 6 for, so the amendment's lost.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Right, item number 7.
We go back to the amendment recommendation, which now needs to be moved and approved.
Well, is there a recommendation?
What was the recommendation again, Angela? Let me just.
I think it's for information.
It was an information report.
Oh, right. Thank you. Yeah. In that case, if it's for noting, we can move on to the next item.
Okay, thank you for that, Alu. Right, item number 7, taxi licensing, administration and compliance activities 2019-2020. Is that yourself, Michael?
It is, Chair, yeah, we're doing, alternate, so Angela will be doing the next one.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, so this report provides information on the taxi licensing activities that were undertaken during the 1920 year period. Information in Appendix 1 sets out the number of requests for service received by the licensing team and the number of licenses that have been processed during the period. That's in the top box. Information about the number of people requesting the counter service, the average service time and the average waiting time, which is in the middle box, and the total number of licenses in place as at the 22nd of April 2020. That's in the bottom box. Appendix 2 sets out the vehicle compliance work carried out during the period, The purpose of this work is to identify vehicles that appear to fall below the council's standards for licensed vehicles and does not necessarily indicate the general condition of all the licensed vehicle fleet. Appendix 3 sets out knowledge test and safeguarding course statistics for the period, other compliance and enforcement related exercises undertaken, and an update on the current situation in relation to NVQ certification. Appendix 4, that sets out the age breakdown of the vehicles that we have licensed on the fleet as at the 22nd of April 2020. The information contained in Appendix 5 sets out a breakdown of the Derby penalty points issued during the period. And then finally, the information contained in Appendix 6 sets out the number of taxi licensing subcommittees held during the period and the number of appeals made against committee and officer decisions and the outcome of each appeal. The report's provided for information, Chair, and the recommendation is to note the contents of the report. Thank you.
Mike, Chair, 50p in the mic box.
Sorry, my apologies, Councillor Spell. Yes, sorry. Does anybody wish to speak on this?
Not particularly, but just to comment on coming new on back onto the licensing committee. This is a really good report, and it's really impressive, that, and it's got all the information at hand. It's easy to read, and I just commend whoever's collated it all together. Really, so it's really important.
I'll take credit for that, Chair.
A round of applause for Michael Kay, please. A round of applause.
No. I'll be honest. It's not me. It's officers within the licensing team who put that together for us. So credit to them.
You know, and credit where credit's due. So if you could pass that back as well, really.
Yeah, same again, Mike. I've been reading it. It's in black and white. It's pretty straightforward. It's brilliant. Yeah, well done on that. Okay, that's all I'm going to
Could I just ask a question? Sorry.
Of course you can.
Mike, there's a lot of information in the report, and congratulations for tabulating it all and getting it all in front of us. Are there any trends? Because it's not a year-on-year thing in the sense we don't see a kind of copy of the report from last year as a snapshot as well. Are there any trends that you've noticed that you ought to you feel we should know about?
Well, we do compare it with last year's position, Councillor Hazelgrave. The figures that are in brackets denote the last year's comparison.
Yeah, I accept that, but that's a 2-year kind of comparison. But are there any kind of longer term or longitudinal comparisons made so that you can see a trend and alert us to it?
No, well, yes and no, I suppose. For example, the licensed Appendix 4, I think that covers the the age breakdown of vehicles, so you can sort of see how the I suppose the graph is looking from how the majority of the age of the majority of the vehicles in the fleet, seem to be at a particular time frame, and you can see that sort of moving along. So some of the older vehicles are dropping off the back end, and some of the newer ones are coming on to the front. It's interesting to sort of see how many private hire drivers we have licensed, how many vehicles we have licensed. We've talked a little bit already this evening about vehicles and drivers that are licensed elsewhere and then coming into the city and doing work. We've not seen as big a drop in the numbers that perhaps the phenomenon would maybe sort of think. Similar with hackney carriage drivers, they've stayed pretty much relatively standard.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you for that, Michael. Okay, moving on to the next item, item number 8, a forward work plan for licensing. I think that's yourself, Angela.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I have included in this report, again, it's a report just for noting, mainly because some of the points we've already been through. And this is just to give an idea. I'm obviously new to Derby licensing, and this is some of the thinking that I was putting forward as a forward plan to deal with by the licensing section. The plan is obviously fluid and the actions aren't prioritised, and obviously demand and resources are going to have an impact on how these things are managed. But as I say, this is just my first stab at what we hope to deal with. And as we said before, it will be updated regularly to the committee on progress and if we come across any delays in the progress itself. The first one is the taxi strategy, and as you know, this document was approved last year with some amendment. It's now time to finalise that document and begin putting together a programme of works to move forward with the strategy aims. And that is obviously to deliver a fleet which is safer, cleaner, modern and focused, as well as obviously supporting the Council's mandate on air quality. The next area is licensing fees. Although licensing is a statutory function, as a licensing authority we can charge reasonable costs to cover the delivery of that service. However, those costs must be both reasonable and justifiable. Many councils have been challenged on the levels of the fees they're charging, and some have had expensive consequences. An overall review should help ensure that we are in the best possible place in the case of any challenge while still covering the cost of our service. Best practice is this is an ongoing regular action. Number 3 is the licensing service. What we're looking to do is make licensing a one-stop shop. I always get that the wrong way round. So that it is an effective and efficient resource for customers out there wanting to come to us. Obviously, accountability and value for money all come into the mix, and we need to look at what we're doing, how we're doing it, and how that best supports the application process and how the customers get involved with it, because obviously best value for customers is also a priority. Digitalisation is always high in this area, and recent unfortunate circumstances have shown how quickly that area has had to grow and how people's experiences of using it has had to grow well. Making as much information as possible is also very important to me, so an overhaul of the website to make sure that the information on there is up to date and useful is a priority. Number 4 is partnership working. As it says, in times where cutbacks are always happening, partnership working is a fantastic tool for all authorities. Not only authorities, but the stakeholders, partners, whether that's joint working or information sharing, it does work. It is its worth. The next big item is street trading. We are required, and we really need to take out a full review of our current procedures and practices in this area. And it's probably one of the subjects that's going to take the longest time, as there's need to include partners, stakeholders from inside and outside the council. There'll be a lot of consultation, so we end up with a product that supports regeneration in the city, whilst also providing opportunities for business growth as the public confidence grows. Then we move on to the taxi licensing policy. It has been raised in the standards that have recently come out, and whilst it's already on the forward plan, it does tie nicely into that new standards document. The new policy, it's intending to have everything in one document to be clear and transparent, and again, this will probably go through a few layers of consultation. I've already mentioned the website. That is an important part of making sure that the customers get the information they need to be able to operate safely and legally. I know personally the most stressful thing is to go to a website and only find part of what you're looking for. So I'm hoping that we can make ours as clear and as informative as possible. And obviously the last thing that hit the deck is the statutory taxi and private hire standards. There are elements in this guidance which will need attention, but in fairness, some will only need updating as we're already doing a lot of it, and some is already being picked up by some of the reviews above. Like I said earlier, I am going to keep the committee updated as to what's happening, and you'll obviously see consultations as they start coming through. Again, this is paper for noting, so there are no recommendations from it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Angela. Councillor Snell, you wish to speak?
Thank you very much, Chair. Now, I just very much welcome this report, but there's one particular bit that I would like to say, the one that I think that does get raised up to me a lot, in particular in my cabinet portfolio with regards to street pride and communities, is the review of street trading provisions. I think all of us can agree that sometimes going down St. Peter Street can be a bit of a trouble or a turmoil for some, especially, I mean, not so much now because obviously we've got the implications of COVID, but you could get buskers on there, or even not so much buskers, but also charity, charity sellers on the streets, which can be a bit intimidating for some residents. So it would be great to see a lot of this review, in particular street trading, especially leafleting on the streets, because that can also create obviously litter around the area. So I very much welcome item 5 of the review street trading provisions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak? Okay, that's noted then. Item 9, General Licence Administration and Compliance Activities 2009-2020. Michael, is that yourself?
It is, yes, Chair, yeah. And in a similar way to the report on taxi licensing, this report provides info on the activities, but this time the general licensing service has undertaken during the 1920 year. The information contained in Appendix 1 sets out the number of requests for service received by the licensing team, along with average service waiting times and the number of licenses, permits and registrations that we've issued during the period, any compliance work and other licence activities have undertaken. Not as comprehensive as the taxi report, because there's not as much information that we glean from some of the general licensing processes. But again, like the taxi report, Chair, this report's provided for information, and the recommendation is to note the contents of the report. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Michael. Does anybody else wish to speak on the item 9 on the agenda? Right, that's noted then. I think that pretty much concludes everything on today's agenda. Firstly, thank you everybody for attending. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Michael and Angela, for your input, and yourself, Olu, and all the officers in concern. Have a great evening and have a pleasant weekend. That concludes tonight's meeting.
Thank you,
Chair.
Thank you.